Welcome back to the big issue. It's a COVID morning so far, discussing the bipartisan probe that is currently ongoing in Parliament of the Health Minister's decision to use third parties to procure vaccines for Ghana's COVID fight and the fallout of that. Last week we were told that contract has been terminated because the third party or middleman failed to meet the obligations of his contract. And the health minister has been defending his actions in Parliament, saying that we're in desperate times. He needed to find vaccines at all costs, and that is why he went the way he went, using what he felt was the established law of the time, the emergency powers that had been passed, and that is why he did not seek parliamentary ratification of a deal that, when you look at the numbers, almost equals the amount of money he pays out as salaries to the health sector. So one would ask exactly how that missed the parliamentary votes, but we are keeping an eye on that. And I'm having this conversation this morning with Franklin Kujo, President of Imani Africa. Lawyer Yaopong is here. Dr. Thomas Anaba is Executive Director of the African Center for Health Policy Research and Analysis. Labram Musa is Public Health Advocate. And let me come to you, Dr. Anaba. So, Dr. Anaba, this is ongoing. We will wait to see what Parliament does. But what big lesson do we have to learn from this? There will be bigger issues in the health sector. There will be other excuses to make decisions like this. What do we do going forward?
Thank you very much. From all what we have heard and what other panelists have discussed, I think that this minister has just sidestepped all rules governing procurement in this country and gone ahead to do what he wants. What lessons are we to learn is that if you try to do things alone, people will see it to be having some clouds hanging over what you are doing when it eventually comes out, because evidently we have seen that there are some clouds behind. There are reasons best known to the minister why he never engaged any of the public institutions or bodies mandated to.
Well, we'll try and get Dr. Anaba back. Labram Musa is a public health advocate. I think he's now back. Labram, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yes,
sorry,
so
I have to go off.
No worries. So you can put the 2 points together, your initial comments on this and then the way forward, so that we can clean the procurement sector in the procurement process in health, because there seems to be a lot of procurement in health that does not go the correct way.
Right. So thank you very much. Building on the point that I was saying, that I felt that there was a lot of inconsistency, and I think that Anaba, properly, dealt with that issue. So, and I think we also heard that FDA is already doing some clinical trials on the Sputnik, but he was also being told that the FDA is not involved in all of this. So really, there's a lot of an issue. But for me, I think that the minister's conduct is not one of the best, and I share in the frustrations that Ghanaians and almost everybody is kind of saying. But let me also say that we need to wait. For Parliament to finish its work, so that we would also know exactly what to say with respect to what has happened. But I also want to add the fact that the health of Ghanaians, especially the health burden of Ghanaians, is not the best, and there's a need for us to continue to ensure that the protocols are followed strictly, and we can only do this if we are able to ensure that we hold our public officers into account whenever they go wrong. I mentioned earlier that currently what we see in our country, you see people, not complying with the rules in terms of the COVID-19. But at what end? How long are we going to continue to allow people to flout the rules? And this is one of the major reasons why I think that government should have gone through the right processes, ensure that the emergencies, the issue went to Parliament with, I'm looking at it from emergency point of view so that we can get approval quickly to be able to secure vaccine and then also ensure that we have value for money. Clearly, we have been told that, as Dr. Anaba mentioned, middleman position or middleman playing out of our health, it's something that I don't think that we should traverse, because the ability of the drugs that we're going to get could be fake, just as was mentioned earlier. I mean, could be high, because the right processing would probably might not go through. And I was even surprised that we've not had any clinical trials on these drugs, and yet we are told that we have already secured about 20,000 of these vaccines in the country. I think that probably we need to investigate and then do some clinical trials on this before we administer it on the people, because we cannot continue to admit anything and everything in this country.
Thank you, Labram. I think we have Dr. Anaba back. Dr. Anaba?
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I was saying that looking at the way the minister went around, it means that he did away with all relevant bodies responsible to help him acquire the vaccine. And that shows that his search was not really done. If he had really done a search very well, using our embassies, using people at WHO, using the government intelligence, using foreign affairs ministry and the rest, he would have known very well that this company would not be able to supply those vaccines the way they were coming, because it was obvious from the whole world that it's difficult to get the vaccines because countries who are very rich even bought the vaccine before they are manufactured. They buy them ahead before they are manufactured. That is why currently we're having serious problems in getting the vaccine for the third world country, and Africa is lagging behind. But what is very interesting is that I saw the lawyer Opong, espouse all the challenges involved in getting a minister, parliamentarian out of office. What he didn't explain, and I would like him to help us, is that what is the process in dealing with somebody who accepts guilt of committing, stepping aside procurement policies, using emergency as an excuse, when he is that very person in parliament passing laws and passing bills within one day using the same emergency procedures? He knew we are in an emergency. That is why the 1.something billion for COVID-19 was approved within one day. So his own, which was 600 and something million, could have been passed within maybe 1 hour. But it is sure, it comes to confirm that his acceptance of guilt shows that there is something fishy. And once there's something fishy, we all agree that he has erred, and he has agreed that he has erred. He needs to be punished. What is the punishment for a minister who is corrupt? We want to know that. We shouldn't be thinking of how is it difficult to remove a minister from his position. What is the punishment for any public servant who is corrupt, who is found guilty of corruption, who has admitted he has done the wrong thing? That is what we should be looking at. Or else, if we are going to use challenges in how to sack a minister, then all ministers will find to do things the way they want, and at the end, no one can punish them. So our procurement laws need to be respected. Even in emergency, they need to be respected. And that has been done. And he is in parliament and knows that it can be done. So to me, I still stand by the position that I think he erred and he has accepted. He should be used as an example for others to follow suit. We know the president has the discretionary power. Yes, he told us in his first inaugural speech that, and I quote him, "I shall protect the public purse by insisting on value for money in all transactions." So the president should reflect on this, to tell us whether this transaction has value for money and take the decision he wants, and we will also judge him. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anaba. Franklin, let me just come to you so that I can wrap up with Lawyer Paul. Before you just even come in, let's just put together this. It's quite obvious we have lapses in our procurement process. You are one of the people you've probably spent your whole civil society career zoning in on the spaces in our procurement. Yeah. And also, it looks like the finance ministry also has a role to play in this, because if you look at all the scenarios, if you follow this particular situation, the finance minister's response to Verdans Gang, who broke this story, but for Verdans Gang in Norway, this story was not going to appear in Ghana. Let's be honest about it. We wouldn't have gotten a whiff of what was happening with regards to this procurement, this particular deal, which is even a problem.
Yeah.
That it has to take a Norwegian media outlet for us to know that a deal worth $64 million is being done in a country with public money. We are now also seeing the Agric Ministry, Finance Ministry situation, where the Finance Ministry is saying, I will not pay for something you've gone to do elsewhere because this is how much money I give you to buy X. How do we put this together where we rationalize the actions of public officers, our money, vis-a-vis the Finance Ministry as well? We're also looking at our procurement processes, which frankly, at the moment, and excuse the pun on you, the play on your name,
as you know,
there's a big gap.
the whole the public system actually thrives on the procurement economy, and so without mincing words, there's a rigged public procurement system that we have, which somehow serves the public officials who are actually interested in, who purportedly are acting on our behalf. So I've never really believed. You recall when the president said his government has saved a lot of money based on comparisons between his administration and that of the former administration. And then we asked for the volumes as well as the values involved in the various contracts. I mean, these are signs clearly of a system that, in spite of what our procurement, I mean, if our procurement law says you can have the authority to do sole sourcing, then we might as well just be doing sole sourcing for everything. I don't see why we should even put in the competitive bidding processes and all of that, because this is clearly one of those examples where the intent was clearly not necessarily to safeguard the public interest, but it was clearly to serve non-private interests. That's not to take away from the fact that the minister and the government has done well under the COVAX facility, where we got about 600 jobs. I suspect that gives us a lot of leverage to have continued on those paths. But as we said a while back, not long ago, that when crisis hits, the politician is almost interested in exploiting it. As I understand from this very contract, that 50% of the money was supposed to be paid in advance before it was going to be executed. The question is, do we know whether 50% of that money was paid? We need to understand that. We also understand there was no exit clause in the contract, and that the minister had procured an exit, more or less a termination letter from the Sheikh on the 14th of July, when the bipartisan committee was set up on the 9th of July. So these things do not surprise me, because I see similar patterns with previous contracts, which themselves have been caught in this type of, if you like, the pleas of insanity. I don't know how this will end, but if there must be something that we should get out of it, essentially we should find out if we've lost money and make sure that we reclaim all that we've lost. It's sad that we did not even have the FDA to be part of the process of certifying this drug. Don't forget, was it Uganda that people procured similar vaccines and they turned out to be water?
Yeah.
It's very important we get to the bottom of this. But it's interesting. You see, there are mercenaries in every part of the world, and there are third-party agents who are interested in cutting deals for countries whose rules or rule of law systems are not properly screwed. I was surprised to find that Ghana is in the infamous league of the Guyanese and the Kenyans and the Pakistanis and all of that. Just to say that there are various products that are procured around the world by non-state actors who have deep links with the deep state. So this does not surprise me. My only worry is whether the Actum, or is it Actum that we had? It's the same Actum that was involved in the PDS deal as well. Otherwise, clearly speaking, this is one of those deals where...
You're at your rhetorical best.
I'm just asking questions. I'm not entirely surprised at all, so we should get to the bottom of this and save some money for the country. But this is not the last you hear of such deals anyway. I mean, as I said, the health ministry just cancelled
But for a lot of people,
young Ghanaians who have decided to recruit close to 200 people who are already doing well, and the health ministry decided to yank the project off them and give it to an international entity, again without any proper procedure. So
this whole COVID thing, it must be said, has looked like, it's one space where a lot of money has been sunk in. If you look at the money,
the World Bank has given us $200 million, hasn't?
They've just recently upped that as well. So we are almost near $500 million in terms of what we've received from the World Bank, and practically every single item when it comes to COVID expenditure is controversial now, because they asked Frontiers. We still don't know what's happening with Frontiers. Recently, I think Okudzeto Ablakwa asked a question on how much money was spent on the quarantining of Ghanaian citizens who had arrived. I think the amount was 53 million as provided to him by the Ministry of National Security. Then 64 million to go and chase to buy COVID vaccines. Just all kinds of things are happening there because suddenly money popped up there. That is the truth, yeah.
Yes, I think we need to also commend those who have been very active in asking questions and also holding public officers accountable. Because otherwise, there's been many times where you may not have been able to hear about these things until the harm is done. Fortunately, because of their positive activism, if I may call it so, the deal has been cancelled before perhaps we may have, maybe with evidence, paid some substantial amount of money, because we are yet to, at least I am yet to know whether we have paid anything and how much of our monies have been paid. And I think that even if Parliament is not able to do that now, when the minister goes back to Parliament with the mid-year review, the Minister of Finance will be able to tell us specifically in relation to this. But in doing a balancing act, I think it's important, not sounding too legalistic. There have been some pronouncements on violations of the Constitution, even though it was under the 1979 Constitution. So it's Okori alias Ozuzu versus the Republic. Nazu Krab CJ, this is what he said. In the opinion of this court, it is irrelevant that an infringement of a constitutional right has not occasioned a miscarriage of justice. Any breach of the provisions of the Constitution carries with it not only illegality, but also impropriety, arbitrariness, dictatorship, that is to say, the breaking of the fundamental law of the land. So that is it. But then, going back to the question that our doctor asked, I'm not oblivious of the fact that the Procurement Act will also apply, and we all know that some other persons have suffered the liability for it, including removal from office as public officers. But in this case, reading from the what you sent us and the answers that were given by some of the officers of the ministry, and because Parliament is still at it, I will not want to pass judgment, but just to say that at least the procurement officer that represented the institution at Parliament said that they approved and gave sanctioned single source approval for them. So as far as the Procurement Act is concerned, that may be a cover for the minister as to whether the procurement institution itself exercise the best judgment for the public affairs in relation to this particular sanction. That will be a question for them to answer. The procurement officers or the procurement institution. And that also will bring in our judgment, objective or subjective judgment, of whether in the circumstances of that case, in fact, special circumstances of that case, they were right in granting single source, one, and two, whether they were right in doing so without seeing a parliamentary approval, which is a precondition.
Maybe they would have explained that away by the COVID situation. Don't forget, India was supposed to be producing the vaccines, but had sort of gotten itself into trouble. There was the COVAX facility itself had issues, and there were other bilateral arrangements that were also not quite coming forth.
So
but it still does not take away the fact that at least some level of prudency should have been exercised.
So that's where the objective test comes in. If you were a procurement officer at that time, will you demand that Parliament passes or ratifies it before you also, if you had the power at all in the circumstances of this case, even grant single source as the vehicle for implementation of the contract? But all said and done, I think that, as I said, those who have been able to have it, because I think that, in my personal view, it is the outrage and perhaps the outpour of general public aversion to the manner in which this whole thing went on may have rather influenced the cancellation than the delay or inability to supply as at this stage. But in my view, that may have been the better option than still continuing to wait. Perhaps at the time when the minister was prompted and he became aware that he had erred, contrary to his previous decision, the contract had to be cancelled.
But I think where a lot of people just gave up on
let's also not forget, I mean, this is not the whole brief for the minister. Every country itself was imbued with this whole COVID thing. And Africa, essentially, if you recall, had just received almost less than 1% of the vaccines, right? I remember the Zimbabwean Masiyiwa was almost in tears, saying that not a single dose had been given by the Europeans to Africa. And then there was they were blocking all of this. In fact, the follow-up story, it was a CDC Africa story on the BBC, which also suggested that even the Europeans were not going to grant, if like, migration or immigration rules, were not going to countenance persons who have been vaccinated from the developing world with certain vaccines they suspected could be less efficacious than this. So I can understand the plea of insanity.
Rather, not special circumstances.
It's okay. It's okay. Let me just move on.
We should wait for the report. I think we should also wait for the report.
From Parliament, you mean? Yes. But it's interesting that this has been done in the public domain. We've heard all that needs to be said.
The only challenge is that, look, Jumamin is a good friend of mine. My only challenge with this whole issue is that there's been a litany of similar incidents.
And that he has perpetrated.
Exactly. So that's the only problem here. Otherwise, nobody will be calling for all the...
Anyway, let me say thank you to Dr. Thomas Anab, Executive Director, African Center for Policy, Health Research and Analysis, and Labram Musa, Public Health Advocate. I will switch guests for the second part of the show, which deals with the fact that the Ghana Health Service has indicated that Ghana has recorded 2,500 COVID-19 cases from the 1st to the 14th of July 2021. Now, according to the Ghana Health Service, the upsurge in the cases is alarming. Also, health professionals in the Ashanti region continue to raise concerns over the alarming rate of COVID-19 infections and the high death rate in recent weeks. So we'll just play a bit of a report. We'll come back and then we'll talk to Professor Gordon Awandare, Director of West Africa Center for Cell Biology and Infectious Pathogens, Dr. Kwame Sapon-Siedu from the CDD, Dr. John Amuesi, who is the head of Global Health and Infectious Disease at KCC, that's in Kumasi, and then Anakufi Kwache as well will join us. We'll be back.
According to the Ghana Health Service, in the last few weeks, the surge in COVID-19 cases, particularly in the Ashanti region, has been alarming. Data from the Ashanti Regional Health Directorate has revealed that almost 500 cases of COVID-19 infections were recorded between the close of last week, and over 90 cases have so far been recorded in the last 2 days. Authorities are thus worried about the implications of the recent developments on the health system should the trend continue. The Ashanti Regional Health Directorate believes that health facilities in the region will be overwhelmed if infections are not contained as early as possible. The Ashanti Regional Deputy Director of Health Services in charge of public health, Dr. Michael Roxanne has been speaking to Citi News.
As at the close of last week, the paid week 28, we have recorded close to 500 cases. That's for that week alone. The previous week we had 350, and we are in a new week. So far, we have received results for about 92 cases as at today. So looking at the trend, the cases are increasing, like I've described. So it's not something that is pleasant at all. If things don't change, we continue to record this astronomical increase in cases. Yes, for now, the health system, we have beds, we have logistics to work with. Our staff are committed, but there's a limit. There's an elastic limit beyond which the system will break down.
A visit by Citi News to the Central Business District of Kumasi showed a low-level adherence to safety protocols. Some residents in Ashanti region are thus calling authorities to consider sensitizing residents on the increasing number of infections. They also want the strict enforcement on the adherence to the COVID-19 safety protocols.
If you want a reduction in the virus, you have to put something in place which is going to, cover off everybody's and spread, like to prevent the spread of the diseases.
So you think authorities should enforce?
Yeah, enforce. I remember some time ago in Trotro, if you are in, they will force you to buy.
Yeah, in Ghana for no say one force ya obiara be nani say bibi sa ho nti so mo force ye no empanifo ebe ma announcement say bibi say e koso nti no o mu information bi ntu akwan mu na ye Ghana for no ye won say bibi say e ho no na yensa enhye kwa nose mask no enu mom na be boa bi.
Residents want authorities to strictly enforce the COVID-19 safety protocols. From the Central Business District of Kumasi, I am Fatih Amin Ibrahim for Citi News.
Yeah, so that was the situation from the Ashanti region, but it's just a national situation as well. If you look at today's numbers, according to the Ghana Health Service, we have 497 new cases and 3,818 active cases. So the numbers certainly are going up. We were in the hundreds. About a month or so ago. But this has been coming, and let me go to Dr. John Amuesi, who's the head Global Health and Infectious Disease. Dr. Amuesi, good morning.
Good morning to you. Hope you're doing well, and good morning to everyone on the in the show as well.
Thank you very much for spending time with us. Well, I guess I should start from this point. Why has the system on COVID broken down so badly?
Well, I think it was more a question about when rather than why, and I mean the why is what pervades everywhere in the world, where you see cases rising largely on account of the Delta variant. We like to say that. We have let our guard down, and that's what I hear the authorities saying, that we've let our guard down, and that is why the cases are going up. But truthfully, if you look at the way we've been living our lives for the past couple of months, it's not been very different. The weddings, the funerals, and all the other gatherings have been going on as usual. I have not seen a particularly, significant decrease in the rate of nose mask wearing and so on. And so I am most inclined to believe that just like is happening in other parts of the world, this astronomical increase can be attributed to the Delta variant. Now, what's happening, and I think Professor Wandari Gordon, who's also on the show, can speak more to this, is we know the Delta variant is with us, but we are not presently in a position to tell what proportion of the cases we have attributable to the Delta variant. I know that, for example, the outbreak at the Chimota school, when they looked at this, they were able to say the majority were the Delta variant. As a scientist, I'm not going to generalize at Chimota to the rest of Ghana, but these are all very soft indicators that there is an additional variable here, which is different from what we have been used to. And this is why, from a scientific viewpoint, I would like to make a very intelligent guess and suggest that the rise we're seeing is related to or secondary to the Delta variant. Another point that we need to bear in mind, which suggests that beyond the losing or lowering our guard, the Delta variant may be responsible, is the kinds of people who are reporting to facilities and the kinds of symptoms that they're showing up with. We're seeing younger people who are reporting to facilities who are very ill, who are being hospitalized. Before, when we had the first and second waves, and now just to make it very clear, we are in a third wave. Forget about that. We might enter into a third wave story. We are in a third wave, and I can say this pretty confidently. We saw people who were hypertensive, diabetic, and had other comorbidities, and were actually much older. They were the ones who were getting really ill, and they were the ones dying. Now we're seeing actually kind of a shift, seeing much younger people getting sick, getting breathless. We're seeing people presenting also with symptoms, largely the headaches and the abdominal pains and symptoms that were slightly different, from what pertained during the first and the second waves, which are actually synonymous with what we know regarding the presentation of the Delta variant. So I think these are some of the things we should look at and be considering when discussing what may be accounting for the increase in the number of cases. Of course, then the next question is, so what? And I guess we'll come to that, but just by way of introduction, that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you for that. And you've just answered the question I was going to ask, because you have come out outright and said, look, we are in the middle of a third wave. And I guess
I can explain that further if you want. I can.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's quite clear for me. Professor Gordon Awandare, when the last time we spoke, you spoke about the need to push testing up. You wanted the opportunity to do more tests, to do more genome sequencing. From our last conversation till date, have we increased the number of tests we are running? Because that was also a significant problem. Yes, we've seen the case count go up. Are we testing as much as we should?
All right. Good morning to you and to all my colleagues on the show and to your listeners. Well, so the testing, the regime of testing that we have is sort of a responsive type of testing. So it's based on people who show up with suspected symptoms on one hand, and then travelers on the other, and then contact tracing of any positive cases that result from either of those two arms. So the testing is going up because more people are, showing up with symptoms that need a test to be done. So it's not necessarily a deliberate strategy to expand testing. So I wouldn't put it that way, that we have done anything to expand the testing levels. It's just that more people are showing up to be tested. So definitely the number of tests done per day is going up. Now, what I was calling for was for the deployment of antigen testing, which are more point of care, type of test that you can take and get a result in 15 minutes. And I was saying that the FDA has approved a number of these tests. And so we need to take steps to make sure that these are available for people to use. Even if they have to pay for them, they can do that. In my organization, we have these on hand. And anytime there's a suspected case, the first thing we do is do the antigen test in the whole group of people who work together. And then we identify those who are positive and we ask them to go home whilst we do a PCR confirmation. So these are things that we can deploy for good effect, because we're in the third wave. Like John said, we cannot pretend that there's no third wave. We're in the third wave. The question now is, how far would the peak go? Where are we going to peak and then start coming down? The numbers are going up today, almost 500. That means that we're still going up. And that's the wave. The wave is up and then down. So we're on the up now. We get to a peak and then we start coming down. So I don't know when you would say that you are getting to a wave. We're in the wave already. We're just in the upward portion of the wave.
Well, Professor Awandare, you the scientists are willing to admit to this. Officialdom says very little these days and is not very willing to admit to this. We've heard the word imminent used. We've heard it is coming used. It still means the same thing. But why is it that you, the scientists, are not urging officialdom to tell us what it is? Perhaps that might induce the behavioral change that we are looking for.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. I think that maybe the officials are being diplomatic or they're trying to not scare people. But I think that's the wrong approach. I think you need to tell the people the reality so that they can protect themselves. If we keep communicating as if we are still not there yet, then people still think that there's time. We have to let people know that we are there, and there's an urgency now. So the communication has to change to one of urgency and the need for immediate steps to be taken. So I think that we have to respect the intelligence of the Ghanaians and realize that they can see all around themselves. People are seeing that friends and colleagues are getting tested positive. That wasn't happening a month ago. So you cannot deny the fact that we're in a different place, and we cannot try to deny the reality and sort of say that we are yet to get there or we are trying to prevent it. No, what we are trying to do now is to limit the damage. But we're in it already. We're in the third wave. We're just trying to limit the damage.
But Professor Awandare, there's only so much you can do as Director of West African Center for Cell Biology of Infectious Pathogens, really. The bigger job is somewhere else.
Yeah, we as scientists, what we do is to put the information out there. We tell you that these are the variants that are causing the wave, and then it's left with the policymakers to enforce the restrictions. Like others have said, we have all these restrictions that are supposed to stop large public gatherings, but they are not being enforced. Today, as we speak, weddings are going on, funerals are going on. There's nobody there to tell them how many people can be at the funeral and whether they are wearing masks or not, whether they are dancing and hugging or what. I mean, it's just free for all. Nobody is taking it serious. So if we don't enforce these things, then it's inevitable that the cases will keep escalating because we're dealing with, two very highly transmissible variants, the Delta, and then there's another one that we've been tracking, which is one that was first identified in Mauritius, which is the B11318. It has not yet been declared as a variant of concern, but we've been tracking it, and it has been increasing in Accra for several months. And even with the arrival of the Delta, it's still staying around, whilst the Alpha has basically gone down drastically. This other 318 variant is sticking around and competing with the Delta, which means that it's also very fit and a robust variant. So these are the realities that we as scientists, we put out there, and then policymakers have to do what they need to do.
Okay, let me talk to Nana Kofi Kwachi. He's a voice everybody knows on this particular matter. He's a research fellow in the Department of Health Policy and Management at New York University. Nana Kofi, good morning.
Good morning, Gospel. Thank you for having me.
You are like the bad prophet nobody wants to listen to when it comes to this matter of COVID. But here we are today. I get the sense of frustration from Professor Gordon Awandare. I get it from Dr. John Amoisi to a certain extent on the scientists are doing their bit. Officialdom does not seem too interested from where I sit right now.
Well, I think the challenge obviously right now is that we've kind of settled into a rhythm of things that would always in any situation lead to a higher spread of a new variant. We know that mask wearing is down. We know that hand hygiene, people aren't really doing that anymore. People basically don't even understand the fact that ventilation is a big factor here. Physical distancing, large gatherings. Those have been going on for months now. Those have been attended by people who are supposed to be enforcing the regulations. So it's very hard right now to change the direction of the ship. But it's extra difficult when the people in the bridge refuse to see the iceberg ahead. We are in a situation where we need to really change public behavior, because the other way to deal with this pandemic, vaccines, that's not going to happen in the short term. So public behavior has to change, and it has to change now, because as Professor Wandari has said, the data, and Dr. Mercy too, the data shows that we are already in the third wave. Actually, if you look at the numbers that were put out yesterday, the test positivity rate for tests done at the hospitals, that was the third highest recorded in 2021. If you look at the test done in the contact tracing group, which is where the travelers and contacts are counted, that was the highest since March 17. If you look at the cases we detected at Kotoka, that was the 16th highest case count at Kotoka since September, 325 days. So when we are sitting here saying that it's coming when we are there, the reality on the ground suggests that we have to really adapt our behavior. So I really hope that going forward, public health authorities will, not just as a question of accountability, but effective risk communication, actually acknowledge that we are in a third wave, actually acknowledge that we don't have time to be pretending like we can spend another weekend of clubs being open and funerals happening. Actually say that we have to stop that stuff, because if we don't break the chains of transmission now, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, we're going to be sitting back here asking, how come hospitals don't have oxygen? How come people can't get ambulances? And this is avoidable. So if we end up there, it's again another policy failure. So I hope that the very simple act of accountability, candor, transparency, and communication will become the short-term priority of the Ghana Health Service and MOH and Ministry of Information, so that we can at least get the public to understand that the risk is real, it's now, and that the things we have to do requires measures.
Well, it's interesting you talk about behavior, and all of you are talking about behavior, but there are those who also talk about the example of leadership when it comes to behavior, and it hasn't really been the best, has it?
Of course, I mean, if you're doing risk communication, again, I see online a lot that risk communication is not the same as public relations, and if you conflate it to, you mistake what is a science from what is basically marketing. Now, on the science part of risk communication, what you are trying to do is not just to put some billboards or send out some tweets and say, COVID is there, wash your hands. You are trying to actually impact behavior. That requires you to be using, in public health, the many behavioral models we have, assessing that over time, and communicating not just the messaging, but the context as well. You have to make sure that people understand objectively what's going on. And one of the obvious cues for that is what they see in the behavior of the people saying, look out, look out. If the people who are saying iceberg ahead are not turning the ship and are just sitting in the bridge not doing anything, then everybody on the deck of the ship thinks it can't be that bad, because the people in control don't seem too bothered by it. So when you have, especially if you listen to a lot of the Vox Pop interviews right now from your network, from other networks, you begin to pick up on the notion people are saying things like, oh, but funerals are happening, even public officials are doing this and that. I think pretending like that is not an influence on public behavior. It's not reasonable. And so it's important that the public officials who are enforcing this stuff acknowledge that errors have been made, and don't come and try and justify the errors with pseudoscience. You don't come and say, on one hand that protests can spread COVID-19, rallies cannot, funerals cannot, when all those things involve basically the same settings of large crowds, mostly in the open air. You have to be consistent with the science, and it has to reflect what we know about COVID-19.
Let me come back to Dr. John Amoesi. Dr. Amoesi, should a lockdown be back on the table? We've seen countries do this, even in the sub-region that we're in, where as soon as they get hint of, a wave coming, they say, okay, let's close down again. Is that an option we should be looking at right now, or we should just be looking at insisting on the enforcement?
No, I think it's a really interesting question that you ask, which we need to interrogate much more deeply. Now, let me explain to you how these kind of measures work. It's either a drink deep or taste not approach that we need to take. If you, and I like giving this really simple example, and I repeat it again, if you have a room that's supposed to take, say, 20 people and you fill it with 100 people, that's overcrowding, right? But if you then go ahead and say, okay, because it's overcrowding and I want to reduce that, I'm going to take 10 people out of that room and have 90 people in there. That's still overcrowding, and perhaps you've not done anything significant that will make any difference at all. So with all these restrictive measures, to really make an impact, especially when you are in a third wave like we are right now, you need to come down hard. And the question is, can we afford a full-scale lockdown? Can we afford to really come down hard? I'm afraid I'm not really in a position to determine whether this is possible at all, given what we saw as the impact of full-scale lockdowns and what we did early in 2020. Very effective. If you look at the epi curve and the impact of that lockdown, it was very significant. The R naught, because we were tracking that, went down significantly. Of course, at that time, I must repeat that the testing we're doing was pretty representative of what was going on in the country. Right now, as Gordon said, we're testing in a reactive manner. We're testing people who are sick, who are reporting health facilities. And so I'm afraid we don't even know exactly how bad it is right now. There's a lot more people who are testing positive, who are actually ill and are not going to the hospital to even get tested at all. We don't have your classic sentinel sites where you're doing regular testing in a systematic way, so that you can measure your rate of spread. We're only using positivity rate, which is a function of how many tests you're conducting. And we're conducting different numbers of tests on different days. It's not on a regular basis. And we're testing in different places, not in places that are representative of the entire country. So there's many variables in there which are essentially making us fly half blind. I wouldn't say totally blind, but literally half blind. Perhaps the most reliable measure, which I mentioned before, is our hospitalization rate and our death rates. But the moment your hospitalization rate, your death rate becomes an accurate measure of your situation, what that means is that it's almost a bit too late, and it will get worse before it gets better. So I am a bit concerned right now, given that we saw hospitalization rates going up last week, last 2 weeks, and this week now we've seen death rates also inching up. What that means is that next week is likely to be worse, and I don't know how much worse it is going to get. So that being said, I think there's a lot of things in the mix which we need to look at to determine whether, putting in place restrictive measures will be helpful. If they will be helpful, then it has to be really hard, tough measures. And I don't know whether we have the mojo to do that at this time. I really don't know. It will work, but the question is that at what cost? And I just can't tell, unfortunately.
Okay. I have another question that I'll ask. I'll ask that question of Dr. Kwame Sapon-Esiedu, but I'll take a quick break. When we return, we'll continue this conversation and then also look at the appointment of Kissi Agyabeng and approval by Parliament as a special prosecutor.
You're at Port Masa, tam kubanwi am kan ko fi ayi me dunu mo boje bona jam wai. Ha be bia you can be wai. HD logo no bong. Wait you say HD local channels na mo hwe no. And so pictures here clear. E 5 times better. Ese other channels dem ko bi hwe hormo. So go dey mention mo ntram hwe akra why. Oh, what the pictures.
Who knows tomorrow?
What the picture? What do AD plus decoder or multi TV and now Electroland agent Pia natural local channels na HD mu the here so better
star 879 hash
numbers from people box you and now the advert AD channels na you can
get an HD Plus decoder from now till the 9th of August for just 89.99 Ghana cedis and enjoy 3 months free subscription. Enjoy all the excitement and live sports action in the HD Plus Air Bosso Philippines promo. Promo lasts from 7th June to 9th August 2021. Visit hd-plus.com.gh or call 024-243-9872 for more info.
Half a nose for good things.
Welcome to SolarTech, the #1 manufacturer of innovative products in power protection. The SolarTech Ultima LCD UPS is a line interactive UPS with a unique LCD screen allowing you to monitor its performance and get the best from your electrical equipment. Monitor the battery level, input and output level, load level indicator, and overload indicator on your LCD screen. It provides a solid, reliable source of backup and has an inbuilt stabilizer which enables all computers and televisions to remain wholly protected. It comes in ranges of 650 VA to 2000 VA. Remember, stay original. Buy SolarTech. For more information, please visit www.solartechghana.com.gh. SolarTech, the power to protect.
Welcome back, and just a couple of messages so that I can continue this conversation on COVID with my expert panel. Charles Nawoshi says the health minister, being an accountant in a former chair of the Public Accounts Committee, makes him a laughingstock with the current happenings involving him. It is very regrettable. Peter from Amanja says, good morning, Godfred and panel. Let's not pretend the health minister took this decision in the best interest of the nation. He did it to put money into his pocket. We cannot allow such gross disrespect to the nation to keep festering. He must resign. And this actually brings me to my next question. I was going to ask that off, but I think I'll go back to Professor Iwandari and Akufi Kwachi on this. Why have we stopped the education on COVID-19? Why has President Akufo-Addo stopped giving us weekly updates on Ghana's COVID-19 cases? Why has the Ministry of Information, led by Kojo Nkrumah, stopped giving us updates on the daily? And Professor Wandari, let me come to you on this one. When we started this, there was the mantra of, during the daily updates, spread calm, not fear. There are those who say perhaps now might be the time with the way people are behaving to educate and say and spread fear and not calm. There's nothing to be calm about.
Well, I don't think we should spread fear, but we should spread reality. The reality is that there's danger out there. So that means that there's going to be a little bit of fear, and that is good. A little bit of fear is good. I think that if you look at the dynamics of how our COVID-19 situation in Ghana has evolved, when there's some fear, when there's a little bit of fear, people follow the protocols and the cases go down. That's how we've managed to control all the, both of the previous 2 waves. It's normally some level of fear which, makes people, follow the protocol. So let's just tell them the reality that we have, 2 dangerous variants in town, and that these are highly transmissible, and the least mistake you make and expose yourself, you're likely to be infected because these are, highly transmissible. And we also know that the people who get infected with the Delta, for example, they come up with a very high viral load. That means that they have a high level of the virus in their system. And that is what makes them more transmissible, because when they have a high viral load, when they speak to you or sneeze in your direction, a lot of virus is shared. So it means that a lot more people can get infected from that. So these are realities that we just need to tell the people so that they will take the necessary precautions. If we keep downplaying it, I think that's actually dangerous, because then people are not going to realize that we are in a very urgent situation. And I think that the idea of having regular press briefings again, I think is good. I think it helps to put the focus on the issue and make people keep thinking about it in their daily life. So I think that let's get back to that. We are back to an emergency situation. So we should start behaving as such. So let's have regular updates, and the president, should consider doing, one of those addresses soon, before it's too late. So I would support that.
Nana Kofi, we have seen a lot of money being thrown at COVID, and recently we've seen the World Bank sign away more money to help us with the COVID. But there are those in the space who say the money hasn't gone where it should go in terms of the enhanced education. In fact, the education has never really been at the level it should be at. And also to the scientists for testing, for doing all kinds of things. How is that situation going to improve?
Well, I'm not exactly sure how that situation improves, but, because at the very base of that, in every place I've ever worked, as a lobbyist, as a researcher, the reality is that these kind of decisions come down to political will and political commitment. We have gotten significant amounts of money from the World Bank, and like you say, there are critical, really critical aspects of the COVID-19 response that, when you look at allocations in those directions, I feel like it says a lot about whether or not we are interested in controlling the pandemic as a public health emergency or the appearances around the public health emergency. Because, Professor Wandari and his outfit I work with, these guys are doing genomic sequencing, which is some of the most critical work we need as part of vaccination drives, to know what things are circulating. The funding there, has been fairly limited. If you look at the funding that Noguchi is working with, Noguchi and work with, two of the main research centers, KCR2, most of the funding isn't coming from GOG, it's mostly outside sources. There's also obvious things like, the antigen test question. I always say, like, when I was very disappointed when I heard, Dr. Siasari say that schools are the safest places, not because because one, schools are extension of the community, so reflect those things, but because there's also things we can actually do if we are committed to investing the money in the science to actually know that. For example, antigen tests could be used for not testing all the students at the school, but doing some kind of routine systematic screening, maybe 50 students every 2 weeks, maybe 100 students every 2 weeks. You sample that, you know what's going on in terms of fertility rates. You can do some testing with PCR to find cases there, rather than waiting for students to get sick and then using that, as we're doing in our general testing, as a starting off point for public health response and all that. We really need to understand that we can't be spending all this money, during this era when we're saying that we are cash strapped, and not dedicating to the things that have the highest value, highest impact in terms of our response. And on top of that, if we are also spending the money, it should be preparing us for all the different scenarios that can play out. Your question about a lockdown earlier, of course, that's a balancing act between the rate of infections and health system capacity. So it's not a decision that you make just beforehand and say you're never going to go there, because the situation might force you there. So what you have to do with the spending you're doing is plan for that scenario. How do you make it so that it doesn't end up being a starvation order for the poorest and most vulnerable people in Ghana? That's the kind of stuff that we're supposed to be doing with this money. really investing it in areas that allow us to live out the precautionary principle, which is basically that we have a limited scope of knowledge because of our testing. So let's plan effectively for different scenarios that can happen by allocating those resources in that way. But again, that comes down to political will, because as for the things that need to be done, the scientific community has been saying it for 15 months. So I don't think that's something that needs to be rehashed. It's a question of whether or not public health authorities and policymakers understand those as priorities and are committed to responding in that respect.
And finally, from you, on the matter of the vaccines, we discussed this in the first part, the political aspects, but the COVAX program at the moment seems to be struggling. Our hope seems to be coming from the donation that the U.S. government is providing. What are the guarantees that this will come and we are prepared for? We are getting Pfizer, Moderna, to be, just for clarification, what are we getting?
So at the most recent update I checked, next week the African Union is shipping out 6 million doses of Johnson & Johnson. Ghana is supposed to receive just under 400,000 of those doses. And that's going to be the next real big batch we're supposed to get. We're hoping to get Pfizer when the U.S. does its distribution to the African Union next month. They are looking to distribute the first 60 million of the 500 million donation of Pfizer vaccines. And their plan there is basically to, in that first 60 million, to distribute that generally across the continent, because coverage is kind of universally low. So we're not clear on what the number exactly will be for Ghana, but we know that next week we'll be getting that. But I don't imagine we're going to end up getting the 1.2 million that we've been hearing, because if you look at what has been given elsewhere in the continent, it would be like giving Ghana 20% of all the Pfizer supply that they're distributing next week. That's not going to happen. So I think the 1.2 million we are hearing is probably our total allocation that is going to come through over time. So what we have to look forward to in the short term, Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer, that also raises a question about what Ghana Health Service wants to do with respect to the 500,000 people waiting for a second shot of AstraZeneca who are at or beyond the 12-week mark for the vaccine. Because if they are going to if they're going to mix doses, there are ethical considerations there and reset considerations there that they have to be planning for. And if they are not going to give second doses until they get AstraZeneca maybe in September, October, then they also have to be communicating and following up in a proper study the people who are going to have to delay those doses now maybe 2 or 3 months. But that's the current short-term picture for vaccines for Ghana.
Okay, thank you very, very much on this. And let me just ask this question for Professor Wandari and then Dr. Amoisi, and then we can wrap this up. So Lawyer Opon has a question. He says, why are some persons who have had a second dose of the vaccine testing positive? And he's asking whether that means the vaccine is not efficacious. Dr. Amoisi, can you help?
No, sure. Yeah, because I think it's a great question from the lawyer. We've made it abundantly clear that the vaccination does not stop you from getting COVID entirely. In fact, prior to the Delta variant, the vaccination was not entirely foolproof from getting COVID. And this is why you'd hear efficacy of 70%, efficacy of 94%, and this kind of thing. It just should tell you that it is not 100%. What we also know from the Delta variant is that the protection that you get from getting the virus is lowered, not significantly though, by a certain quantum, which means that you are still a little less protected when it comes to Delta variant. However, when you look at it in terms of risk of hospitalization, it's way up there. Your risk of being hospitalized is significantly lowered, even in the face of the Delta variant. And if you take it a notch further and look at it in terms of death, your risk of dying is very, very low. In fact, we've had very few cases globally of people dying after being vaccinated. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but very, very few numbers. Here in Ghana, we have had cases of people who have been double jabbed and yet still have tested positive for COVID. I know of at least 2 colleague doctors who tested positive for COVID, even though they've been double jabbed. For one of them, she was just slightly unwell, and because we have a setup where we can do our testing, we said, well, why don't you just go ahead and test, because we have it right here, you can test. Then she tested and she was positive. So, we set her aside, isolated her, so to speak, and she was just pretty fine, all right? And then we also had another doc who was taking up a gig somewhere and was required to test prior to beginning his assignment. And when he tested, lo and behold, he was positive, but he was totally asymptomatic. He'd been double jabbed. We have not had, and I ascertained this from my colleague who runs the ICU at Confanoche, asked that, have you had any double jab people who have been hospitalized? And she said an emphatic no, there's not been a single person. So it's really important to know that the vaccination is not foolproof against getting COVID, but it definitely protects you big time from being hospitalized and certainly from dying. What is beautiful about this vaccination is that, look, we've had so many people who have come in contact with people who've had COVID, and you see the clear line drawn between those who are vaccinated and those who are not. Those who are not vaccinated are coming down positive, and some are getting sick. And those who are vaccinated, who are all around those people who have the disease, are just not getting sick at all. And just yesterday in the U.S., I think one senator from Alabama said it is really an epidemic of the unvaccinated, and that's really what it is. Unfortunately, here in Ghana, the greater majority of our population is unvaccinated, and this is where we need to be concerned. And the vaccines, we're getting a bunch coming in next week. That's way not enough to get us up there. And even if you're vaccinated, you need time to build up that immunity. So for the next couple of weeks, the next 6 weeks or so, we really need to brace and do our very best until those vaccines come in. Otherwise, we could be in for a pretty rough ride.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Amoisi, for the education, and I'll end the COVID conversation on that note, and then we can talk about the special prosecutor. So a big thank you to my guest on this particular one, and Nanagofi Kwache, Professor Gordon Awandare, Dr. John Amoisi. And a couple of messages. Debbie from Kufuria says, COVID-19 and its effects, let me just take that. It says COVID-19 and its effects on decisions taken by some health ministers across the globe. We are indeed not in normal times. Let's take it cool on health ministers in this era. So a few days ago, Hugo de Jong, Minister of Health, Welfare and Sports, declared that his ministry will not abide by a court order on how and when COVID-19 information should be disclosed, regardless of Parliament's intervention for the ministry to accept the verdict. Yeah, Debbie, but that I am quite aware of that case, but that matter had to do with COVID numbers. It had nothing to do with money. If it's a matter of money, trust me, in Holland, he will present the money. So let's not equate the two situations. They are not the same. Senior from Ashaiman, Godfred, let Lawyer Paul understand that during the time of President Mahama, a minister was sacked after declaring intention of amassing $1 million whilst in office. The health minister's case is even worse and is still at post. Sacking a minister should not be rocket science. John Atewin from Gary says, Dr. Anaba, may you live long. Let's not play ostrich with this case and immediately call for the dismissal and possible prosecution of the health minister. He's not above the law. Josh from Tema says, what the old minister did is unpardonable. No excuse will suffice considering his professional background as a seasoned accountant and all the audits he has done. He has grilled wrongdoers and probed a lot of shady deals in the public sector. Let him do the right thing by resigning, or else he should be fired. We need to call a spade and stop the window dressing. He flouted all laid down rules. So this is what has come through. So we can now move on to the special prosecutor. And he made all the headlines on Friday. And he assured during his vetting that he will make corruption costly to its beneficiaries, despite admitting that he cannot stop the practice entirely. Now, during his vetting, also refuted claims that he was linked with the Japa deal. And subsequently, the Appointments Committee of Parliament has recommended Kisi Ajebin And I've been told that is the correct pronunciation of his name. His name is not Kisi Ejabing, it's Ajibing, it's A-G-Y-E. So it's Kisi Ajibing for approval as special prosecutor. So we'll catch snippets of his vetting and his recommendation. We'll come in and have a conversation about the challenges that lie ahead for him. We've seen one of the challenges, looking at what the health minister did. He has a lot of work to do.
The over 3-hour vetting saw the special prosecutor nominee attempt to convince the appointments committee of his competence, outline plans for the office, and react to some criticisms against his appointment. The committee, in its posture, sought to solicit the nominee's view on specific constitutional issues that border on Ghana's fight against corruption. A topical issue in the corruption conversation has been the seeming overnight wealth amassed by political appointees. Queried on prosecuting persons over unexplained wealth, Kisi Ejabin suggested that one can be held liable for failing to account for the legal source of a property or wealth.
If we are to place it in proper context, unexplained wealth, I would say that if the person cannot reasonably explain as matched against his lawful income the amount of money in question, then that aspect, in my opinion, should be criminalized.
The office has always been criticized over the perceived interlocking nature of its functions with that of the Attorney General. Though the office of the Special Prosecutor draws its authority from the delegated power of the Attorney General, many are those who believe the Special Prosecutor's objective of investigating and prosecuting corruption and corruption-related offences will interfere with the functions of the Attorney General as specified in Article 88. Acknowledging these concerns, the nominee highlighted the need to promulgate an act to differentiate offences under the jurisdiction of the two offices.
I think this can be solved by properly defining, in my opinion, the jurisdiction of the OSP. And here I would advocate that we should start thinking about, Honorable Chair, if I'm not being overbearing, the passage of a Corrupt Practices Act.
Mr. Kisi Ejabin, having been recommended for approval by the Appointments Committee, will become the second special prosecutor after Martin Amidu, but the nominee during his vetting declined all attempts to compare himself to his predecessor.
Honorable Chair, there was a reference to heavy shoes of a named individual. Honorable Chair, I'd like to state that I prefer to wear my own shoes. In the sense that I am my own man and I'm coming with my own experiences and professional training. In this quest, my conscience and my learning of the law are going to be my guide.
He further expressed confidence in courting the support of the president in the line of his duty, even.
So that was the vetting of Kisi Ejabin. Kisi Ejabin, not easy to pronounce. And you can say your thoughts on Kisi Ejabin, 0549986996, 0549986996, 0550585832. Franklin, let me come to you on this one. The Office of the Special Prosecutor, the president sold it very well when he proposed it. It went down well when he proposed Martin Amidu and he took the job. It's safe to say it's gone downhill since. If we look at all the stories that have surrounded it based on what Martin Amidu did whilst he was in office. What is the task that faces Kisi Ejabin personally from, first of all, it's not even personal, first of all, from a restoration of the public confidence in the Office of the Special Prosecutor, that the president actually means business with this particular office?
It seems as if we were caught in the rather rare conflict between the powers that an individual feeling the position would have versus the institutions being imbued with a lot of powers that in itself evokes fear. That's what I think we were seized with under the actual tenure of Martin Amidu, because the whole country was agog with excitement that Martin Amidu was such a towering figure. He's earned his stripes by going against people within his own party, which is quite rare in an African setting. And so we were not oblivious of the fact that he was going to act similar in terms of after he's taken the post. And I guess that we need to now, a lot of water has passed under the bridge. We all knew what happened, even though a lot of it should have come much earlier. But we knew what happened. And so for me, it looks to me that Mr. Kisi Ejaben should be, it's actually in a role that I suspect should elevate the institutional capacity of the office to be able to act in such a way that those other personal attributes that we all knew Martin had would probably become some sort of a thing of the past. What I'm essentially saying is that if the institution has been so established and clothed with powers, it must not be inhibited in any way or shape or form in order to act properly. I guess the bigger question is, will the institution be able to do that in the political environment we have? I'm not even interested in the conversations about the seeming powers that he needs to share, the office needs to share with the Attorney General. I'm more concerned about the daily, increase in attempts to collude and corrupt basically pillage the public purse, which has everything to do with our procurement systems in this country. Which leads me to the other point that, you see, the whole idea of fighting corruption the way we think we want to fight it, or grand corruption, as the office is supposed to be dealing with, it sends a certain sense that this must be done. The office is supposed to prevent corruption. In fact, he himself, the special prosecutor to be named, he himself suggested that he cannot stop corruption. What I suspect he meant by that is that the steps or the reasons for which corruption occurs should be dealt with even before they actually occur. Because it costs a lot of money to fight people with deep pockets who eventually, are subjects for this type of inquisition by the special prosecutor. Sometimes high-level cases can take close to 4, 5, probably the tenure of an administration. The question is, what had been achieved as a result of the establishment of the office? So I still go back to first principles, that if we want to stem corruption, if we want to fight corruption and waste in our system, political environment, you start at the presidency, the Office of Government Machinery. Because that is where all the possible deals that would eventually lead to corruption or lead to acts of corruption are actually birthed. So the point is, instead of spending a lot of time to be now interested in, finding who authorized a deal and how it was done and spend public money again to do that, we have a simple route. I'm not saying it's easy, but there's a simple route in fixing procurement systems that we have. I think we've set time with that number, that the biggest corruption issue in the room, as probably an elephant in the room, is procurement. That's essentially, almost every case is going to deal with, assuming he gets to deal with those cases, are going to be procurement related. So the procurement reform agenda is the number one thing that I suspect he might probably turn on its head if he decides to probably act before these incidents occur. I noticed he did say that he's going to be serious about issues of conflict of interest. The question is, would they have to have happened before the office is seized of it? I'm saying this not to suggest that the office is not needed. All I'm saying is that we've had tomes of conversations, lots of conversations. We've established a lot of institutions that are supposed to deal with these matters. And often we fall short because somehow the political establishment has managed to set us all in this merry-go-round thinking that we only need big men, big names, and probably big institutions to fight something that can easily be fought if we had done the number one thing, which is to prevent it in the first place. Otherwise, Mr. Kise Jaben is a fine brain. I know him personally. And I think that as the expectations of him in doing his work should be matched with the levels of resources. I would think he should be interested in ensuring that he recruits his own investigators, must be well paid. But that was the only way a similar position in Brazil managed to somehow break the jinx around high-level corruption in that country. The prosecutors had vast amounts of power, which included the right to appoint who they wanted. Don't forget, it was one of the things Amidu complained
irrespective of their background.
No, not irrespective of their backgrounds.
Those people
as
come with
against the
different skill
government.
sets.
It means that's against the government appointing them, isn't it?
As against the government appointing them. But again, I say this in full recognition of the fact that we should be working towards preventing acts of blatant abuse of the public purse, rather than work backwards in order to salvage what may have been lost. There are many instances where we lose money, and the officers or the officials would plead sometimes insanity, or sometimes plead that they were not the appointing authorities at the time. So we welcome him, and the institution must live, and the fruits of it must be seen by everybody.
We'll also be joined by Stephen Asante Bekwin. He's a lawyer to discuss this. This is a, but you know, Kisi Ajebin, to take time to get used to this new pronunciation of the name you have brought, Kisi Ajebin, to the office of the special prosecutor. But Franklin has spoken about the setting up, which is important because it was one of the things that Martin complained about, even though the government also proved that they had made funds available to him to set up that office. It was funds that he had not assessed. Once the office is set up, he has to deal with, again, this is an office that deals with perception around. So the perception of being amenable, because Martin was seen as not being a man of the system, which is why a lot of people were very receptive of his appointment.
Yes, I think that perception itself is problematic. The institution we are talking about is not about an individual. It's the same as the Attorney General.
Okay.
When there is no specific Attorney General in place, maybe because of transition from one government to another, some lawyers have even raised the issue. In that case, their clients could not have been prosecuted. And the court has made it clear that it is not about an individual, let's say Godfrey Dami. If he's not even around, it is an institute, it's an office. So in this case, we are talking about office of the special prosecutor. And if you lose sight of that, we will be looking at an individual who is referred to as special prosecutor, and I can bet you we will all fail. And I made the point even when Mr. Amidu was in power. Too much emphasis on that person. And I'm not discounting the importance of that person's own competence, but I'm saying that instead of rather highlighting or overly highlighting the competence of that person, we should rather look at the office. But even more importantly, and above all, ourselves. If we decide, and I'm continuing from part of where Franklin left, if we decide that we are going to try as much as possible not to engage in corruption and corruption-related practices, the Office of the Special Prosecutor will have very little to do. But of course, we recognize that we are human, and the propensity to engage in crimes such as corruption is quite high. Otherwise, if we decide that henceforth we and our children are going to make a conscious effort not to engage in such practices, it doesn't matter who you put there as special prosecutor. I mean, there will be very little work to do. Secondly, the special prosecutor obviously cannot do the job alone or by himself. That's why the Act provides for employment of other staff and even a deputy special prosecutor. In the absence of or a substantive special prosecutor, the office is functioning or ought to be functioning. Okay, so I think that's a very important point. Yes, I mean, I've known him in professional circles and so on. There's no doubt at all, and he has made it very clear. That's why he was able to convince Parliament's Appointments Committee in the first place. I mean, we've seen other vettings that have gone beyond 6 hours and I think even another day.
Martin's vetting was a very long
Yes, indeed. But this had been fairly comparatively shorter than had been expected. But he has put a lot of things out which I think has enhanced public confidence or has led to the recovery of public confidence in the institution if it had been lost or been reduced in the absence of Mr. Martin Amidu, for example. So he needs to also watch that. But he's human. And he has to recognize that as well.
But you think that comparison weighs heavily? He said he will walk in his own shoes. But you think it's inevitable that people will weigh him for a long time against who Martin Amidu was, even though he's in a hurry to also establish his own personality?
Well, I wouldn't. And I would like to quote a famous politician, whom am I to even compare it to? So I think it's important. Even though he's coming with his own shoes, you should also remember that the shoes have been prescribed. The size of the shoes have been prescribed by law. So I think Mr. Kisia Jibin is familiar with that. That the shoes he's bringing have been prescribed. The texture, the size, perhaps may be modified a bit because he being so quite slim, like myself, his legs may be, and then maybe the socks you wear. He likes very fanciful socks. And you have to match all that. So, and give it to him that, well, he is coming. But the explanation is that he's his own man. But then he asks that his conscience and the law are his guide. That is very important. And the law must be his guide because the special prosecutor is not even a judge. No matter what the special prosecutor does, seizure of properties, freezing of accounts, you only have sometimes 7 days. After that, if you don't go to court, you cannot continue freezing the account. You cannot continue confiscating the property. The seizure will become an illegality. For a year, you have to go to court, and within a year, if you are not able to justify why the account should continue to be frozen, it has to be open, given back to the people, unless by the act, a court decides otherwise. So if we just see the special prosecutor or the office as if some overlord whose decisions are final, we'll be making big mistakes. I mean, his job is not so much different, perhaps a bit more different in terms of the nuances, but then it's like the job CID does. Even though they charge you with committing an offense, it's an litigation. There is a further investigative process which is final. That is at the court. We shouldn't forget that at the court, investigations also go on at the court. And this time, a third person, an arbiter, quote-unquote independent arbiter, sits there and can tell you, the special prosecutor, you may have violated the laws yourself. All right? Your friend Kelvin GVG, I saw them as defendants in a case recently where a high court judge has declared part of the executive instrument to be inconsistent with some provisions of the Constitution. This is an instrument emanating from the highest point of our governance system. So If we have this in mind, then we, even as a people, will not see the special prosecutor as a very strange, powerful, all-knowing person. If we know that is at our level, we will even be more ready to go to him or his office with some information that come to us, which I insist we should be doing. That is our duty. Article 41 says we should combat waste and of public resources. And, okay.
I just tried to bring in Stephen Asante Bekwin, but Mr. Bekwin. Okay.
But let me make the point also that another very unique part of this constitution, as far as I see, is the fact that the investigation does not only relate to public officers and politically exposed persons, but persons, I'm quoting, persons in the private sector involved in the commission of the offense. If you remember, the Supreme Court recently held that the Auditor General's powers don't extend to actions or acts or commissions of private persons, only public officers. But this one, give the special prosecutor the authority to investigate all private persons in this country, as he put it, whose resources, acquisitions are suspicious in nature, that may be bordering on corruption. This is very unique, and I think that that is the aspect, because we are all talking about it. When we sometimes forget that there cannot be corruption, or maybe it is almost impossible for a person to have been charged with corruption if there was not a second party or a third party. So you're the one going to give it. Now, whether you're a private person or a public officer, you'll be investigated.
I guess this is where it comes in about his concern, his very interesting comments on unexplained wealth and gift giving.
Of course, they give
his answers. His answers there were
members of parliament
a bit strange for people. If you paid attention to his response to that was from Haruna Idrisu, the minority leader.
He said he was given a batakari by the chief.
Yes, and also asked him what his thoughts were on unexplained wealth and how he was going to deal with that.
I think that borders on beneficial ownership issues, really. If you want to lift the veil to find out how someone within the public sector
or private sector, from what he's also saying.
Exactly, because they may have connections with private interests and private sector people. I would imagine it's the lowest common denominator in any investigations anyway. If you wanted to find out what how the tentacles of a particularly corrupt, should I call it, occurrence. Otherwise, what's the point? I mean, you can't be investigating a public officer who may have given waivers to a private person in return for kickbacks. You should do that. I think it borders on the quality of the investigations that will be done, which is why we are all saying that the resources must be forthcoming, resources in terms of not just money, but in terms of the talent that must be used to investigate all of this.
And also, more importantly, for your purpose, the Public Procurement Act is one of the areas that he's been given exclusive or maybe coordinate role to investigate, and especially under Section 92(2) of the Public Procurement.
And there's a lot that could be done. You know, I suspect we keep dancing around this issue of procurement, and I worry. Look, when in the United States, when Obama was launching his big infrastructure stuff, you know what they did? They said, look, anyone procuring, they don't care wherever you're procuring from within America, as soon as it's beyond $20,000 units, right? You should put it online. Mention the subcontractors, any beneficiary along the line. Everything must be known about them. That type of sunshining limits the opportunity for collusions. Can we say in this country, I think those are Camille's, may so rest in peace, who at the point suggested that for a certain amount of money, a threshold, some of these things should be made public. And we were going further to say, if it is beyond $100,000 unit, we should list all the contractors, subcontractors, and change the technical evaluation panel members every time. We shouldn't have the same entity panel evaluation, and then the quality of the people assessing most of these deals. If you go in and you look at the caliber of persons who are evaluating multi-million-dollar projects, as we mentioned in the case of the Electoral Commission, people who had just been, someone who had just spent, I think, a month at the bar, was almost seized with looking at a matter involving millions of dollars, and within 1 week had passed the deal. Oh. I think we need to, that's where the procurement issue comes. It's not just about single source or whatever. Recall in the case of Kearney. I mean, the companies that were shortlisted as competitors, clearly speaking, did not even have the gravitas to deliver the quality of project. Yet because they were in a league with a preferred bidder, eventually the evaluation committee had no work to do. So a procurement reform, and I'll be happy if the special prosecutor looks into that direction. And it's all in line with what I said. Let's take steps to prevent these things before they happen. So that we now do not want to, because somebody can equally say that, look, I procured under emergency, I procured because people were dying, I procured because I needed to do that. And in that case, it's the judge who would have the final say. The millions would have been wasted at the end of the day. So maybe a preventive type of inquiry by the special prosecutor.
The risk assessment.
The risk assessment will be useful. Anytime a committee, any ministry is going to procure any item, the special prosecutor should be in the know.
Perhaps of a certain value?
Of a certain value.
To
For
be
me,
determined.
I think if it is around $400,000 or $300,000 and above, he should then be able to, that in itself is a lot of work for him. I don't think he would have to wait for people to come and report incidents. The procurement issue, I remember discussing this with, I've forgotten who the official was, that look, if the ministries are going to be, the finance ministry is going to be very effective, before every ministry brings its budget to be satisfied or approved, these conversations must be had first, because that's where they mostly part these contracts. But I'm saying that there's a special rule for the special prosecutor as long as procurement is concerned. Anybody that's going to procure an item above $300,000, he should be given, he should know which entity is going to procure. The entity committee, the tender evaluation board, they must verify the credentials before they even sit. And must actually do efficient expedition to find out the possible conflict of interest situations as well.
Okay,
so
and I think, sorry.
Go ahead.
So fortunately, you know, the governing body, which is quite powerful, in fact, it says the special prosecutor is somehow subject to the governing body. But it has full powers when it comes to investigation. So the governing body is made up of, and I'll run through quickly, the special prosecutor, deputy special prosecutor, one representative from the audit service. So some of the information we are talking about, that rep from audit service should be able to furnish the special prosecutor. Yes, nominated by the Auditor General. One representative of the Ghana Police Service, not below the rank of Assistant Commissioner of Police. One representative of YOCO, not below the rank of a director. One representative from the FIC, Financial Intelligence Center. One rep from STRAJ, also very, very important. Then one person with background in intelligence and not below the rank of director, nominated by the minister responsible for national security. Then one other person who is a female, representing the anti-corruption civil society organizations. The members of the board shall elect a person other than the special prosecutor and deputy from among their number as chairperson of the board. So when you have all these persons who, by the nature of their job, get access to special information, then it is right to say that there cannot be any other justification why the special prosecutor should not have access to these kinds of information. I think that perhaps maybe there should have been one person from Parliament as well, because most of these things, especially the procurements, which are quite voluminous in terms of value, have to go for what do you call it, ratification from Parliament. And then also one from let's say, the procurement institution should also be a person who should be able to inform the special prosecutor that we have been presented with this procurement of this volume, and we think that you should have to be aware of it and perhaps give your input. There's nothing wrong with them doing so, but it will also mean that the Office of Special Prosecutor should also, now because of the benefit of these people who have this specialized expertise in the various areas that are very relevant, if the special prosecutor, in addition to this, also opens up to the other institutions that conduct investigation, and also those like the anti-graft special, what do you call it, the NGOs, that will go a long way to support him, apart from the normal staff. So he may not even need too large staff, because these people who are members of the body, of the office, governing body of the special should be able to also, because they have functions to perform, quite elaborate functions, formulate policies, ensure proper and effective performance of the function, advise the special prosecutor on recruitment selection, develop and monitor implementation of code of conduct, facilitate cooperation between the office and relevant national investigative bodies to ensure proper and effective performance of the functions. And this is very, very significant.
You know, you don't even have to look far. If you read most of these procurement decisions committee reports, you don't have to be too technical, in the case of Ghana, to notice the bid rigging processes, the incompetence of the evaluation panels, because some of the things we saw, we are not overly technical, but we can say that 39 plus 101 is supposed to be 140 and not 145. So just by looking at the tallies,
yes,
I'm just reducing, just saying
to the minimum. Yes,
all of this is needed, and so the work is really cut out. There can be a lot that the Special Prosecutor's Office can be seized with, just on procurement.
I will go into two other issues and then wrap this up. Let me just take a couple of messages. Well, Amable in Dansoma not too happy with the Special Prosecutor. He says the new SP clearly lied when he said he didn't know the reason why his predecessor resigned. Who kept him in the state of incommunicado? Anyway, wouldn't you be anxious to at least know the history of an institution you want to head? Unbelievable. Lawyer Kisi Ajibin is a hard nut to crack. He is very assertive, and when he wants to take a path, there is no way you can let him turn his back. So these characteristics, if indeed that is what he's bringing on board as SP, will make it difficult for anyone to influence, and this is coming from Citizen Francis. Kweku from La Paz says the special prosecutor is mature, experienced, and qualified, but I can bet my last penny that he cannot do the job. Can he prosecute corrupt MPP officials? Is the question. And Kweku from La Paz is asking Ali Kali Kunate from Sandema. Good morning in Sandema. Says, good morning. The special prosecutor demonstrated that he is more than qualified for this job. And Ezekiel, well, he was gone beyond the SP, talking about the appointment of the new IGP. And he says that would not change anything in our security unless it is linked with the total removal of powers of the president from appointing the IGP. Hashtag implements the Constitutional Review Commission's recommendations. Good morning, Godfrey. The nominee for the office of the Special Prosecutor should not disappoint the president like Martin Amido did. This is Suleiman Adamba from Tamale. Good morning to you, especially my mentor, Franklin. I think Lawyer Kisi is fit for such an office, but it's a matter of if he will control the political environment or the political environment will control him. Martin Amidu couldn't function because of the effect of the political environment. This is Steward Enoch Kwabena from Pru East in Yeji. Koshi Badahu from Denu says, who told you as of independent institutions can be compromised? This OSP stuff is another layer of the showmanship. The best antidote to corruption is the construct of strong culture against it. Xylix Duane in London says, I don't think Kisia Jibin can do the job. Of course, we all know this government, but I wish him all the best. That is what he is saying. We'll take a quick break. When we return, we'll wrap up the conversation on the taking up of office of the new Special Prosecutor Citi Ajibing. If all goes well, August 1 is when he'll start work. We'll be right back.
Masa, jam kumawi am kan ku fiya ya mi dunu mo boje bona jam wai ba ha be biya yuki am be bi wai HD logo the bottom. Where you say HD local channels na mo hedo. And so pictures ni clear. E 5 times better. As in other channels na go be show hormone. So go dey mention mo ntram ra why. Oh, what the pictures.
Who knows tomorrow?
No, it's what the picture. What do AD plus decoder or multi TV and now electroland agent PR natural local channels now HD mu the here so better
Star 879 hash.
numbers from kubi box you and now the advert AD channels now look at
Get an HD Plus decoder from now till the 9th of August for just 89.99 Ghana cedis and enjoy 3 months free subscription. Enjoy all the excitement and live sports action in the HD Plus Air Bosso Philly promo. Promo lasts from 7th June to 9th August 2021. Visit hd-plus.com.gh or call 024-243-9872 for more info.
Half a nose for good things.
Welcome back to the big issue as we wrap up the conversation with the vetting of Citi Ajibing as for the office of the special prosecutor. Messages are coming in. You can also send your 0549986996 and 0550585832. This one also says, good morning, Mr. Boaf. I'm particularly happy with Mr. Citi Ajibing's answer about the non-public investigations, particularly regarding NGOs who use donor funds for their personal use and the sabotage of government policies. This is coming from Mensa in Accra. But Franklin, he had to answer that question, the big elephant in the room. Machinabidu mentioned him and his various episodes on Ejapa. And he said he had nothing to do with Ejapa.
Well, that's the answer he gave.
Yeah. It was something we were expecting him to respond to because of who had said it.
Yeah, well, now he says he was not. So it's his word against that
Martins. So 2 special prosecutors. And then also was interesting his take on whether he would resign if he faced the same circumstances as Martin. And his answer was quite interesting. He said he's not open to, he's not the kind of person who is susceptible to open shows of confrontation, but if it gets unbearable to the point where he feels, I can't handle this, I will walk. And I also thought that was quite an interesting response to give.
Well, I'm sure he's saying that if his work becomes very difficult to do, he would resign. That's essentially what he's saying. Again, it's about style, really. I mean, if you are being inhibited in your work, and it's clear, he said you do the work to the best of his ability, professional ability, and his conscience. So at the end of the day, it is these two that will guide him anyway. Yeah. Again, style is very. Of course, everyone has his own style of doing the work.
Yeah, so I mean, one important point in the act that I wish he will, he will really concentrate on is the power to trace properties that are tainted with corrupt monies or monies realized from corruption or corruption-related offenses. And for me, I have always said that this situation that sometimes even persons who have been charged with and convicted of offenses relating to corruption and so on, now, and this brings in why he says perhaps corruption will be very expensive. You can decide that, well, let me just steal 2 million of the state money. I'll go in for maybe 2 years. Previously, I think it was just about maximum of 3 years. Now it's about 20 years or so after the amendment.
You come back
so
and
2 years, you invest the 2 million. You'll be lucky. The political class may influence your release. And you come back and enjoy the booty. Not that we didn't have a law that empowered the system to trace this. But now that this has been clearly delineated and placed under him, for me, that is more important. And I'm not discounting the importance of imprisonment as a punishment. But the fact that we will now have access to the property. So if you are going to prison, and in addition, you are going to lose the property that you have acquired with that tainted money, you will think twice. That is the expenditure he was talking about of corruption, the high expenditure he was talking about. Because then you go back to first principle that crime does not pay. Because crime will pay if you can just be in prison for maximum of 3 years or so, and there's very little effort to trace the proceeds or the investment you have used the proceeds of this tainted crime for. Then you can just bargain or gamble, go to prison, come back, the money would have yielded huge interest. Sometimes you may even get further political appointments. And in that case, crime is not expensive.
It's true.
It doesn't really, in fact, in that situation, crime pays. So that is the angle that I think he must, when he's approved, exercise that power continuously, because that can also help to ensure Franklin's insistence of prevention. Because once I know that I can really lose both my reputation and the property that I have acquired as a result of corruption, and when I'm convicted, then you think twice even before you attempt to go into such evil ventures. You understand? So I think that is one area that he should emphasize on, because fortunately the courts have ruled that whilst you are facing criminal charges, the civil action can also run concurrently. So tomorrow you go to the criminal court for proceedings, the next day you have the civil proceedings by which your property is being traced. And the two can run concurrently. You may, whilst you are even in jail, and they say, and even they can proceed against you when you die or you are scorned. That is also provided by the law. So these are the areas, but of course we have to also conscientiously have to be consistent with these provisions, know what they are. Because if you see that somebody is engaging in corruption or corruption-related offenses, you are, let's say, a contractor, you have to pay a 10% kickback. You go and pay, you're a private person, you'll be investigated and punished. Again, if you decide not to pay, then in that case, the person who would have received it and would have engaged in corruption will not have the opportunity to do so. So it is for us also to ensure that when it is even demanded, like it happened in one institution, you also inform the authorities that this authority or this public officer in a very public institution is asking me, private person, to pay bribe or engage in an act of corruption before a contract is awarded my institution or awarded me. And you think that it needs to be investigated. If we don't give the information, and even what is worse, and the police complain about it, when they receive information, now the people, the complainants are usually, oh, he took my phone, can I get my phone? The phone is given, and that's it. They won't go to the court After all, I forgot my phone. So if you give the information, one, it must be reliable information on which criminal investigation may be capable of being founded on, with evidence. Above all, you must be ready to assist the Office of Special Prosecutor by even going to court to give evidence. Because if you do all this and you don't produce the evidence, or you don't even go to court to give the evidence, they may do all they could, go to court, but there will not be sufficient evidence. Mind you, it's proof beyond reasonable doubt. And evidence is the key. So we'll be talking about all this in circles. And why we need it. One, I said first, we must endeavor not to engage in it in the first place. But when we find evidence of it, instead of going out with that information, just go to the Office of Special Prosecutor. I'm sure they will have branches in the district and so on, or even go to the police. The police, once they know that this is not their remit, they will send it to the Office of Special Prosecutor, and you have police stations littered around the country. When you do that, then you are helping the Special Office of Special Prosecutor to perform the functions. But if we conceal it, oh, he's the wife of my cousin, so how can we do so? Of course, there are areas where when you do so and you are found out, you dare not come back. Then, finally, those who are giving the information should be able to protect the identity of the informants. There have been too many instances where people have been willing to give information only to hear now, even when he has gone to give a statement at the police station. You see the statement on social media. The statements are leaked. And you put them in harm's way. So people will not also freely just decide voluntarily put themselves in harm's way by coming to give information. So the Office of Special Prosecutor, and when Mr. Jabin is confirmed, should make it clear, give the assurance that they are going to protect individuals who are minded, and everybody should be, to furnish them with information about corruption and corruption-related information, and that they will absolutely protect their identity. And finally, even reward them.
Okay, your point ends there. Let me just take the last line of messages and then we can call it a day. Kea Mofa tweeting on at Kea_Mofa says, interesting times ahead regarding the Minister of Health. It's difficult to justify how an individual from a foreign country can supply the nation of Ghana a resource from another country that a sovereign nation like Ghana cannot do. Really? Again, says that the justification for actions and inactions by some current appointees in Ghana, if compared to their counterparts in other countries, does not meet the average intelligence many consider as acceptable, given the resources at the disposal of these appointees. Not only regarding the scrutiny procurement, but even procure past questions for senior high school students is equally unnecessary, given the circumstances of Ghana's financial situation. And another one says, I sincerely think due diligence must apply at all times, whether in normal or emergency situations. Other countries can get it wrong, but Ghana's name must always be held very high. Mane Unaifa says, what the Minister for Health has done with the monies we borrowed in the name of COVID will marvel you. Some insane contrasts here and there. He has to be put under an intense electronic microscope. And another one says, do African governments set up agencies and departments to only test and monitor situations without producing anything? What have we been doing all this while? When will Africa begin to create something for the world? Is the question he is asking. And on that note, I say a big thank you to Lawyer Yaopo and to Franklin Kujo, President of Imani Africa, and to all the other panelists who joined us on this episode of The Big Issue. My name is Godfred Akuto-Wafo. Have a good weekend.